Hello, my name is Eunseok, and today I'll be presenting a study that reconceptualizes the notion of noticing and output. In proposing the output hypothesis, Swain argued that learners' production of output is an essential element in SLA. Swain claimed that one learns to speak by speaking, and that producing the target language may provide the trigger that forces the learner to pay attention to the means of expression needed in order to successfully convey his or her own intended meaning. In a 1995 article, Swain extended the scope of her hypothesis and identified three functions of output. First, noticing; second, hypothesis testing; and third, a metalinguistic function. She argued that being pushed to produce output may allow learners to notice a gap between what they want to say and what they can say, which might result in recognition of their linguistic problems. In this paper, I focus on the notion of noticing in relation to output. As mentioned, one possible role of output in language learning is to trigger learners to notice their linguistic gaps. What is missing in this line of research, however, is whether noticing occurs during process of producing output in actual interactions with co-participants, and if so, how learners do noticing and what they accomplish with it in particular settings. Expanding the theoretical and methodological scope of research on noticing, several CA studies have approached the notion from an amic interactional perspective. One stream focuses on respecifying SLA terms, such as focus on form and attention, while another stream explores the resources the participants draw on when accomplishing interactional noticing. In contrast with cognitive SLA, which treats noticing as a psycholinguistic process that occurs inside of an individual's mind, these CA studies have reconceptualized the notion as a joint local accomplishment that is achieved as participants orient to learning as a social practice. The present study builds and expands on this body of research that considers noticing as a social term. The focus on this study differs somewhat from that of previous respecification studies on noticing. In particular, this study is concerned with how a student's noticing becomes observable in relation to their deployment of teaching objects in an under-researched educational site, the dyadic consultations for IELTS preparation at the university's ERC. The excerpts analyzed in this study come from a large corpus of video-recorded speaking consultation data that I collected for 11 weeks from an English language center at a university in Hong Kong. Intended to help students improve their speaking skills, these consultation sessions allow students to practice speaking English and receive advice on their performance. In particular, this case study focuses on examining a dyadic IELTS preparation session between a tutor and a Hong Kong local student in her early 20s. The session lasted approximately 25 minutes. The tutor is 24 years old and a native speaker of Russian who speaks English and French as her second and third languages. She has had various teaching experiences before she joined the ERC Center 5 months prior to the recording. The IELTS practice consultation consists of the following two main activity phases. First, practice task, in which the tutor opens an IELTS type task and the student performs the task. And second, advice giving, when the tutor gives the student advice based on the student's performance. This case study's multimodal conversation analysis focuses on tracking a teaching object that emerged during the task and advice-giving phases of the consultations. Excerpts 1 to 3 show how the participants construct the past form of verbs as an object for teaching and for practicing, how the student, in collaboration with the tutor, deploys the teaching object during her task performance, thereby showing evidence of competence to participate in the activity, and how the tutor expands the task-relevant topics through question sequence while orienting to their shared history with the teaching object. Now, let's start with excerpt 1. Here is a frame grab of my focal participants. Prior to the excerpt, the participants were engaged in advice-giving sequences on other matters. The excerpt starts with the tutor shifting to a new language focus, which is the past form of verbs.
That's one thing. Another thing would be the past form of a verb.
Is it about the tenses that I use? I forgot to pronounce this as some or...
Yeah, it's a common slip because you talk about the present and you know that basically to have present tense, just the subject and the verb done. But you also need to have an ending occasionally for singular, for he, she, and it needs to have the past third person singular. Yeah, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And another thing, when you talk about the past, like when you talked about your childhood and growing up there, some of the verbs were used correctly in the past form, but then some were in present. So it was a bit confusing. Are we still talking about the past or are we in the present now? So pay specific attention to past forms as well. So these are our goals for the next task. I will give you a topic which will ask you to talk about something in the past, like a journey you've made or a specific place you visited, and you will have 1 minute to prepare. You can take notes here if you like.
The tutor moves the advice-giving activity forward by introducing the next topic for discussion. She also writes past form on a piece of paper with the number 2, which also marks moving to a new topic, not only to make it a focus of attention during the ongoing course of action, but also to make a record for the students' later use during self-study. Without waiting for the tutor to finish writing, the student initiates a confirmation-seeking question to clarify her understanding. She does so by verbally constructing her question while gesturally finger-pointing at the notes to make it clear what it refers to, which may be the comments on subject and verb agreement. She then provides her own candidate answer in line 288, thereby demonstrating how she understands it. This question leads to a revisitation of prior advice on subject-verb agreement, which is not shown here due to time considerations. The tutor reworks her shift to the next topic, past form of verb. She does so by initiating the shift with and another, which shows that the upcoming piece of advice is formulated as something additional, while still related to what has just been mentioned. In other words, this redoing is done in a relatively embedded manner, in that rather than initiate repair, the tutor, starting in line 306, reworks her first attempt to move on by naming it as the next item on the agenda, rather than as something that she tried to do earlier. In this redoing, she also illustrates how the student sometimes incorrectly used the present tense when talking about her memories of childhood and growing up. In so doing, she assesses the student's performance somewhat negatively. In line 314, the student acknowledges the assessment with laughter, which seems to function here to show her recognition of the negatively assessed object. Upon receiving the student's acknowledgement, the tutor explains the topic by providing an upshot that elaborates on how the student's tense shifts were confusing. Simultaneously, she makes an up and down hand gesture that indexes the student's tense shift. With these laminated multimodal practices, the tutor clarifies what she means by it, that is, the shifting of tenses, in line 315. Similarly, in lines 316 to 318, when the tutor says the past, she moves both hands to the side. And when she says the present, she moves back them in front of herself. Here, she is using her hand gestures to augment the student's understanding by highlighting the motion of shifting when saying past and present. As a response, the student provides an acknowledgement with a nod and a continuer in line 320. The tutor then closes the advice-giving sequence on past forms by providing an upshot of the advice, preceding it with so. The upshot functions as closing implicative advice. It also makes the advice explicit and on the focal focus to the student, which the student acknowledges it with her nod in line 322. After a short pause, the tutor announces these are goals for the next task. She does so while grabbing the page of notes to spin it around to allow the student better visual access, and then by finger pointing at a specific part of the notes to clarify what she means by these. Here the tutor is pointing to the written words past form. In this way, she projects what they are going to be doing next, which is practicing past forms. Overlapping with the student's acknowledgement, the tutor continues to provide specific instructions on what the student needs to do next. Specifically, the tutor explains that she will be providing a topic that will elicit the students to talk about something in the past. She then further explains the topic by providing two possible examples. In this way, the tutor indicates that she will be selecting a specific task that should provide space for the student to practice the target grammatical form. She also specifies the time available for the task preparation, indicating the time constraint on the activity. In line 335, after a brief pause, the student's response shows that she understands the tutor's instruction and that she is doing aligning work that is being prepared to do as instructed. Excerpt 1 shows how the tutor and the student, in collaboration, utilize various multimodal practices, including making use of hand gestures and notes to establish an advice-giving sequence on past forms, and to move on to talk about an immediately upcoming task. Next, in excerpt 2, I show how the student performs the task. Prior to the excerpt, the tutor chose a topic for the task by selecting one cue card from a box, which she then handed to the student for her to silently read. The student spent about a minute to prepare, reading the instructions and making notes. The excerpt begins with the tutor closing the preparation phase of the activity.
Time's up. You have 2 minutes to talk. Please start now.
I think the amazing view that I have enjoyed before is when I go to the Chongqing. I meet with my grandma and the relatives over there, and we went to the hot pot restaurant for a dinner, and over there we enjoyed.
The tutor marks the transition from preparation time to task activity with the discourse marker OK, which functions here as a closing implicative marker, and by explicitly saying time is up while turning off the timer. The student displays a cooperative stance towards the tutor, that is, she aligns with the tutor's instruction by dropping her pen while straightening her back to mark that she is done writing. The tutor then moves the activity forward by instructing the student to start the task while providing time constraints and turning on the timer. The student starts her talk by reformulating the written instruction on the task cue card to the amazing meal that I have enjoyed before, thereby demonstrating how she understands the task. The pauses, elongations, and stretch pause fillers display her trouble in constructing the turn. She then moves on to the main part of the task, which is to talk about an amazing meal she had. What is of particular importance in this part of talk is the tutor's orientation to their shared recent history of pedagogical work on past forms, and the student's noticing of her problem with the forms through self-repair work during the beginning of her answer. To be more specific, in line 388, right after the student uses a less appropriate form of the verb go, the tutor raises her eyebrows, which could be an implicit form of repair initiation. In lines 388 to 390, the student then self-repairs I to we after having explained who is involved in we with an I mean structure format. In this way, she orients to the facilitator somewhat marked facial expression. Then when she reuses go to resume her topical talk in line 390, she also self-repairs the verb go to got. She does so while shifting her gaze up to the ceiling, which seems to indicate her doing of a word search. Right after she hears this new less appropriate form of the verb go in line 390, the tutor widens her eyes, displaying a marked gaze look, which seems to indicate that the tutor is reacting to the accuracy issue in we have to go, or at least doing some kind of noticing in action. While keeping a thinking face, the student reworks her self-repair by going back to the use of the verb go in the present tense form, during which the tutor smiles while gazing at the student. The student's repair shows that she notices the problem with the form and is not done with her word search. And the tutor's smile indicates another kind of noticing in action, or at least an orientation to the student's revisitation of the word go. The student then successfully resolved her word search by self-repairing go to went, while conveying a celebratory stance with her laughing voice, went, and laughing face. In this way, the student seems to display her orientation to their shared history of pedagogical work on the past tense. The tutor also displays a shared orientation and conveys a shared celebratory stance with her own laughing face. And in this way, treats the student's successful self-repair on past form of the verb as a positive interactional achievement. Excerpt 2 thus shows how the producing of a target grammatical form is a joint local achievement. Another way to understand the finding is that the competence to participate in the activity was a sequential process accomplished by the student and the tutor. The student was performing or competencing the required part of producing the proper language, and the tutor participated in this work by instructing the student to pay special attention to the past tense forms and through the use of embodied actions. In other words, the data provided empirical evidence that the students' deployment of past tenses were not individually owned knowledge at the onset, but rather they were socially achieved in and through talk. Exercise 3 starts with closing of the student's task performance.
By the cuisine over different country in China.
Thank you. When was the last time you had a meal with your family?
Because my mother will cook the dinner for me every night, so the last dinner that I have with my family is just last night.
Mm-hmm. It was last night.
It was last night.
Nice.
In line 413, the tutor closes the task performance activity by thanking the student while turning off the timer. She then initiates a question-response sequence relevant to the task topic. She does so while gazing at the cue card, thus appearing using it as support to come up with the question. After providing an account, the student answers the tutor's question in lines 118 to 119, which both the tutor and the student treats as funny with their smiles. What is of particular importance during this turn by the student, or what becomes interaction relevance through the participant's acts in the next turn, is the student's use of less appropriate form of the verb is. The tutor provides a correction, reusing the structural format that the student used in line 419, and by substituting the verb is, the trouble source, with was, the more appropriate version. By doing so, the tutor is providing another opportunity for the student to learn the form. Along with the verbal substitution, the tutor employs marked hand gestures and body movements. She raises both hands, strengthens her back, and tilts her head a bit backwards, while stressing the word not only to make it both audibly and visually noticeable to the student, but also to mark it as a replacement for is. The student claims that she understands the correction by acknowledging it with a stressed ah, along with a marked nod and smile, and through quietly repeating the repaired utterance, thereby reflexively showing how she treats the tutor's action as a correction. With the repetition, the student may be taking another opportunity to practice the lexical item. The student's response here shows that the tutor has successfully elicited the student's noticing of the trouble source and practicing of the corrected form. This example of the data shows once again that it is through the attention guiding actions of the tutor, not through her own output, that successfully led the student to notice the problem of hard language use. In short, excerpt 3 provides another empirical evidence that producing of a target grammatical form is a joint local achievement. It was through the tutor's explicit corrective feedback that the student was able to notice and repair the correct form of the word. Swain argued that when learners are pushed to produce language output, it may allow them to notice their linguistic gaps and restructure his or her into language. In other words, it views noticing on the basis of any individual's production. This case study's empirically grounded analysis illustrate that this is not what participants do in this consultation context, at least in the examples I provided. In the examples in the data, the student does not, in the first instance, notice through her own production. Rather, she notices the target forms that the tutor has guided them toward. In other words, the analysis showed how the student shows her noticing of linguistic problems and attention to target forms through the collaborative social orientation with the tutor. This, in a sense, is what the social orientation has been about since Firth and Wagner, and recently summarized and expanded in the MLJ special issue in 2018. Thank you for listening, and please feel free to ask questions or make comments.